So step number 8 says conclusion time. If the null is rejected, then the alternative is the conclusion. If the null is not rejected, then the null itself is the conclusion. You will always start with two statements, the null and the alternative. After the test is done, only one will be the conclusion. So we have completed the test. We have decided to reject the null. Let's go back up to them. So that's why it's like it's full circle, you know. That's why it's like a research project. You're coming back to the hypothesis, you know, full circle. When you're doing a research project, you have to come back to the hypothesis to test it, you see. So we rejected the null. The null was rejected, okay? So if the null was rejected, what is the conclusion? Can anybody state what will be the conclusion? What's the conclusion? Is the null itself the conclusion? Anybody? The alternative is the conclusion. Very cool. If the null is rejected, then the alternative is the conclusion. If the null is not rejected, then itself is the conclusion. We rejected the null, and we all know why, because the test statistic is in the critical region, so we reject that statement. So we are left with the alternative. So it is the conclusion, and you have to write it in words. Based on the data, the mean is less than it. Okay, so it appears that what Ms. this field says was correct according to the data. So therefore, since the null was rejected, the alternative is the conclusion. Okay, no, the alternative is the conclusion. Consequently, based on the data, right, the mean is less than it forms the average height, the average weight of the babies. And you have to state the conclusion in words there, not in symbolic form. You have to revert back to words. All right. The symbolic conversion is to facilitate the table, you know, to facilitate the curve and the rejection region. That's why the symbols are there for. But when you're concluding, you have to come back and state it in words, either the null or the alternative. It has to be the alternative here because we rejected the null statement. So here you have an example of z-test for mean using the classical approach. Okay.